It's going great. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. We have a lot to talk about, a lot we can talk about, a lot of directions we can go in.
For sure. Well, lead the way, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay, yeah. So, I think we should start with a bit of an introduction. I think we should start with just you know, talking about yourself and introducing yourself and your background and just who you are in the world.
Who I am in the world.
Yeah.
It's a very complex question.
Hmm.
Well, it's a very simple question with a very complex answer.
That's totally Dylan answer. Yeah.
Where should I start? Like how far back should I go?
Pretty far back.
Okay.
Yeah. Genesis.
Okay.
Wherever you'd say your Genesis moment is, like however you want to do it,
Yeah. Um, let's see. So I guess we can start at sort of my creative genesis of when I started to explore, I guess, my own creativity. I'd say it started earlier than when I was 15, but around the time that I was 15, I started working on film sets for the first time. And around that time, I was obsessed with filmmaking. That was like my biggest passion. It's like I wanted to be a filmmaker, I wanted to be a cinematographer. I wanted to shoot movies and TV shows and all that kind of stuff. And so I spent many, many hours every week watching as many movies as I could. We would go to the library and I'd rent like 10 movies a week and I just try to get through all of them. And from that
Wow.
period on, I started working on film sets. Born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There wasn't a huge film industry there, but as far as film industries go, I didn't need a huge film industry. I just needed something to explore. And so there was a local group there, and they produced these Christian films that were called Numas. At least I believe they were called Numas. Anywho, they featured Rob Bell, who was a pastor. Yeah, so I got involved with them and I got an internship with them and started working on film sets through that. And so I'd PA on the film sets and then I would also help out like transcoding footage and different things like that, doing little intern jobs. And so that was my first sort of like glimpse into that world. And it was a really interesting glimpse into that world because it was with a team who had been working together for, probably a decade or more. And so they were very on top of their shit. And it was a very streamlined production, pretty high budgets. I mean, the Christian film industry, there's some money there for sure. So they were able to do, pretty cool things. They had cranes and big operations and decent, crew. And so I got a pretty interesting glimpse into that world at a pretty young age. And it was exciting. I loved it. But from that point on, went on to, continue to work in that world. I moved to Chicago to go to Columbia College to study cinematography. And then from there, started getting jobs on different like different local agencies, like working on commercials and all sorts of different things. Worked my way up from PA to grip and gaff, and eventually
This
worked
is
my
now
way.
like early 20s, would you say?
Yeah, 18, 19, age 18, 19. Because I was only in Columbia for about a year. And I was missing classes because I was too busy being paid to be on film sets. And I was learning exponentially more on a set than I was in the classroom. And so I ended up meeting with the head of the cinematography department. I was like, hey, look, like, what can we do to skip through some stuff? And they wouldn't let me. So I was like, okay, well, I have no reason to pay you to not learn anything, and essentially dropped out at that point. And at that time, I was working, again, gripping and gaffing, working my way up to A-scene. And then through that process, worked on a handful of different things over the years. And I've worked in pretty much every, department on a film set. I was working in the film industry probably for another handful of years after that, probably age like 23, 24. And at some point in there, I moved back to Grand Rapids and I rented out a big warehouse studio and decided to start my own sort of creative agency and art gallery and a handful of other creative projects. And then from there, I was doing that for a handful of years and exploring a lot of different stuff in that space. We were hosting gallery shows, we were working on a lot of stuff locally, but I was finding that the aesthetics that I wanted to explore were not necessarily the best for the Midwest. And so in learning that, where I had so many conversations with people who were like, oh, we love your work, but it's too avant-garde, because that was the only word that they knew and how to describe it. But yeah, and so let's see, I forget what year it was, but at some point I was in that warehouse for probably, I would guess, 5 years, and went through a nasty breakup, just had my heart broken.
Nice.
And then I was like, I gotta get out of here. And so then I moved to LA for the first time. I don't remember what year it was.
Roughly how old are you at this point?
I don't even know. Maybe
Like late
20.
20s?
How old was I?
20s?
Because that would have been, I mean, yeah, mid to late 20s probably.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Quarter
And
life.
yeah,
Saturn return.
yeah. And so that was, I moved to LA for the first time. Was staying with my buddy Caleb in a penthouse downtown on Spring Street, and met a handful of really cool people and really liked it. And then I got really lucky and found a warehouse, another warehouse
Mm-hmm.
in South, and
Mm-hmm.
got really lucky and moved into that space. And that space became a creative haven for a handful of years.
Mm-hmm.
We had a music recording studio, and we hosted events and parties, and found myself, regularly hanging out and freestyling with some of my all-time favorite heroes, icons, started working with a handful of them, doing websites and music videos and different things like that. And
Blue in Exile.
yeah, Blue in Exile, Bus Driver, Open Mike Eagle, the kind of underground LA scene, Project Blowed kind of origins, Limmer Park, all those people got really immersed in that community and that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I'm a huge hip hop nerd, so for me, it was a dream come true in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
getting to live that lifestyle.
Right.
But it's also tiring, you live in a big warehouse. There's always people around, always stuff happening. We're always doing late night events. At the time, I was drinking a lot, smoking a lot of weed, and just like it was just a constant party in a way.
Yeah.
Which at that point was good, in a sense. You get to explore your creativity, you get to work on all sorts of fun things. And then and then at the same time as that, I was also working on some pretty cool projects. I was doing a lot of consulting for different companies. That's when I met Andy for the first time. I was working with him. I worked with him on the augmented reality project.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was like AR stuff, and that was probably 2015 or something. So it was
Mm-hmm.
probably maybe 2014, 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. But it was
Yeah.
like pre-AR being a thing, So we were working on like Google's Project Tango devices, where it was like using LiDAR, and that was before LiDARs were in phones on any other device. And so looking at that, and then working with a handful of other companies, doing consulting for web design and virtual reality and augmented reality and stuff like that. So it was fun. It was a good time. Met a lot of cool people and kind of got immersed in the industry in a way, in the music industry.
Yeah.
At that time, I was burnt out on the film industry, so I wasn't really doing that as much. And I was moving more heavily into like the creative agency side of things.
Mm.
And that was kind of, where my heart was at the time. And always, through all of this, always exploring new things, new technologies, new experiences.
Yeah.
And let's see, after that,
It sounds like around this time is when filmmaking ambitions became more general creative
yeah,
ambitions or
I feel
creative
like that
applications. It's like it opened up.
That's that started to happen in the warehouse in Michigan. I
Hmm.
with the art gallery and the agency stuff. Yeah, I was still doing film stuff a lot, but it was more producing my own stuff because I was working on film sets for so long, and I was seeing all the waste on film sets, and they're incredibly inefficient. There's a lot of money wasted and a lot of abuse and negligence and all sorts of things rampant in the
Hmm.
industry, as I'm sure a lot of people know. That was kind of pre Me Too, or maybe it was kind of in the middle of Me Too kind of stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, right around there.
So there's industry has a lot of issues, and so I was kind of sick of it. And then the gallery and the agency stuff was cool in Michigan, and it was moving to LA is when I feel like I fully blossomed though in a creative sense, because that was the first time that I was recognized of like, oh, I'm a multidisciplinary designer artist. And in Michigan that hadn't been appreciated, but in LA it was like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, we've been looking for someone like you that has a wide array of
Mm.
skills and a big toolbox that you can pull from. And so it was more of a benefit to, I think, the companies on the West Coast than it was for the Midwest. So that was fun. It felt like I was finally being like validated,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
had that sort of recognition of like, oh, like maybe I am good at this kind of stuff.
Right.
So that was really cool.
Hmm.
And so it was in that space for a handful of years, and then through that process, started to explore a lot of new technologies around that time, like 2016, 2017. And before then, I had been, curious about things like Bitcoin and crypto. Like when Mount Gox first crashed, I had talked to a friend of mine and I was like, yo, we need to set up the new Mount Gox. Like we need to set up the new, exchange and like it would be huge. And he's like, oh no, Bitcoin's kind of lame and like couldn't convince him
Mm,
to do it. And that was when I was still living in Michigan at the time. So that was a few years prior to that. But around 2016, 2017, it really started to cement for me. I was like, okay, I got to get into this crypto stuff. So ended up moving from LA to Detroit, and in that process, decided to start a company in Detroit where we were one of the block producers for the EOSIO network because at the time I believed it was the best technology. I was like, this is way better than Ethereum. This is way better than any other systems. Like it's actually set up in a way that can scale, and rather than you paying for gas, it can pay you. And there was just really interesting examples of that through things like Steemit, other sort of precursors to EOS with that Dan Larimer kind of helped facilitate. And so I was kind of tracking that really heavily and, moved to Detroit with this like kind of ambition to be like, oh, we're going to build like a new community currency for the city of Detroit and like connect it into local gardens and local, businesses and have this sort of new community layer.
mm,
And was getting pretty deeply immersed in all of that and researching sort of all the different sort of technological components of blockchains and what you could start to do with them. Through a lot of that research, I was like just getting really excited about the technology and quickly came to realize that you can't really build a new currency system on top of a broken infrastructure, which is to say, the modern capitalist world, whether you're in Detroit or elsewhere, Detroit has its own unique set of problems that has sort of plagued it for the last few decades. But I saw it as cyclically, I was like, oh, Detroit might have its comeback and it could be through these types of things. But again, just realized I was like, okay, wait a minute, but like you can't actually build efficient, you know, monetary currency exchanges on top of, such a faulty infrastructure. And so at that time is when I started to deeply immerse myself a bit more in some of the bigger picture thinking around sort of the whole systems approach and regenerative agriculture and infrastructure and circular economics and donut economics and all these different terms and worlds and started to go deeper and deeper into those spaces. And was in Detroit for a handful of years, I think about 2 years. So it was like 2017, I moved to Detroit. And then around 2019, kind of COVID hit and everything started to, flip and shut down. And I was in the city, and at the time I was like, I need to get out of the city, and ended up moving up north to my parents have a little farm up here where I am currently actually.
mm,
And at that time, I decided to leave the company, the crypto stuff. I was a little jaded on it all. I had seen the route that EOSIO had taken, where it was like they raised $1 billion but didn't do anything with that money in a strategic way, and they were outperformed by Ethereum and Solana and these other companies that were understood the importance of culture and design and aesthetics and how to navigate the sort of marketing side of it. Whereas it felt like EOS had a very bogged down lack of awareness around how to do a lot of that type of stuff. And a lot of the projects on EOS too, we were involved with Telos and Wax and a handful of other sort of emergent blockchains that emerged within that ecosystem. And with all of them, I was kind of just jaded by. I was like, none of these guys really get it. They don't really understand what it takes, like to actually infiltrate culture and to create something profound. Even though I believe they had a better technology, and still to this day believe that they had a better technology. This was like pre-layer two Ethereum stuff, so it was like, But I realized that it's just not about the technology. It's about all these other layers. And that's a part of it. I think that contributed to my sort of whole systems approach to things where I was like, this, you can't just solve for one aspect. You got to kind of see this as a whole infrastructure, a whole ecosystem.
So, okay, so that's what inspired the whole systems approach, like, and that thinking and the recognition that it's like, yeah, we have to create the entire thing from scratch in a sense, or like, the entire environment has to be considered like soup to nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Through that exploration, I had gotten immersed in a handful of other things. And when I moved to the farm, I started to explore a lot of that stuff more in depth in the sense of like now I was on a
Mhm.
farm and now I'm thinking about, permaculture and syntropic farming and biodynamic farming and all these different types of things and healing the soil and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
While simultaneously still exploring a lot of the tech stuff. At the time, that COVID hit, I was lucky enough to be a part of the sort of first wave of like Clubhouse users. And that kind of introduced me to a whole bunch of
Mm,
really interesting, fascinating humans, both in the tech space, blockchain, crypto space, and in the sort of regenerative meta crisis, meaning crisis, polycrisis narrative. And so that
right.
introduced me to a lot of really unique thinkers. And I met some really phenomenal people through that, like sort of movement moment in time that was kind of spawned by a certain app, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And so during that time, I was, because I had a deeper knowledge about crypto and NFTs, because I'd been in the space for a while and things like that, I got involved in a lot of those early NFT groups and helped to educate a lot of people and start to build, that sort of movement in a way. And through that, I was kind of looking at, what are going to be the early adopters to this technology? And the first thing that came to mind was fashion. And I was like, okay, fashion is a cyclical thing. They have seasonality. They have to always keep up with the trends and always be on to the next thing. And it's this kind of ever emerging thing. And then, so through that lens, I kind of approached it where it's like, okay, NFTs could be adopted by fashion probably quicker than any other industry. And so at the time, I
Mm.
collaborated with a lady that I met on Clubhouse. Actually, her name's Lady Phoenix, and we partnered to build out Crypto Fashion Week and the Meta Gala, which was like the Met Gala in the metaverse, is kind of how we were describing it. But exploring really heavily tokenized digital fashion, augmented reality fashion, 3D
Right.
avatars, the metaverse, that kind of stuff. So we were, kind of pioneering that movement, while being a part of the early NFT conversations and exploring the early, metaverse stuff. And this was like pre Facebook to Meta. And so I was involved in a lot of those early talks and conversations and seeing what it could look like to help build out some of that culture, which was fun in a way. But again, at the time, I'm living on a farm and I'm like looking at the real world and be like, the metaverse is kind of silly in the sense of like it's a distraction almost from reality. And I'd rather shift the focus into what this can start to look like to build, sort of a mix. Like it's not that I'm like throwing out technology or virtual reality or augmented reality or things like that, but I wanted to get something more holistic going, so it just didn't feel right in alignment. And so I stepped back from that stuff and started to sort of shift my focus into the stuff that I'm kind of more focused on these days. And I think that's around the time that you and I kind of started to connect. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then came out to LA with you.
Back to South Central.
Yeah, back to South Central, back to a big warehouse, to warehouse life again.
Yeah.
I
Does
don't know
this look
if,
familiar?
yeah, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
You put these curtains up.
So yeah, and I mean, I could get into that whole story too if you want me to, or I don't know if you want to take over on some level of that story.
I guess I would just say I don't want to say too much. I'm really enjoying your stream. But no, actually, I can go later. But
Okay, okay.
I'm curious, yeah, how it fits into your story. Yeah,
Yeah, how I frame it.
yeah.
Well, yeah, so got brought out initially to work with you and Alan to work on the album stuff, but then, through being in the beautiful space that you guys were in, we started to uncover all of this deeper potential that lied dormant in that location that you're at currently. That sort of emerged a whole new narrative around mothership and what all this other stuff can be. And we sort of came together around that and started putting a lot of planning and effort into that. And that was the first opportunity, I think, for me to explore the sort of whole systems approach that I'd been exploring for the, few years previous and putting that into action in a tangible way potentially. And so
Mm,
it was it was really fun for me in that sense to be able to kind of see like, okay, well, what does it look like to have 5 acres with a big warehouse, 100,000 square foot warehouse, and we explored all sorts of different layers to that, from the XR stages and the recording studios and event spaces and healing center and restaurants and community garden and all those sorts of different layers that we started to
mm,
explore and build. So for me, that was a really exciting thing to be able to, put some of that
mhm,
stuff into action in that way. And it's not an easy project. It's not an easy undertaking. It's huge and, it requires a lot. And, I think that we were all wanting it to happen, but it felt like a lot of stuff was stacked against us. And we started to, I don't know, it didn't work out in that moment.
mm,
I guess we can say that. And so I kind of pivoted. I think you kind of pivoted in some ways, and we kind of separated, went our separate ways. And so from there, I was still in LA and still trying to be like, okay, should I stay in LA? Should I go back to Michigan? Should I go somewhere new? And kind of exploring my options from that point on, with the sort of awareness that what we had started to explore there, I wanted to do that, in some way. And so, at the time I was exploring really heavily, like, okay, well, what does it look like to do private membership, like social clubs or healing center clubs and that type of stuff? So I started to explore some of those models. Actually came up with some really good ones, and still have those kind of in my back pocket in a way. And a place like LA that works in, I don't know if that necessarily works in northern Michigan where I'm at, but bigger city, LA, San Francisco, New York, those types of spots, you could kind of do the sort of private membership clubs that I was looking at doing, really high level, elite, VIP experiences with, really beautiful healing layer built in, new technologies, scalar wave, and all this kind of crazy stuff. And then, during that time, I reconnected with an old friend of mine. And at the time, he was the creative director for Grimes. And so I ended up joining him and helping him to, sort of project manage and put together teams and manage different layers of working on Grimes projects, everything from like her AI stuff, website stuff, little promo stuff here and there, and then largely helping to manage a lot of the live show visuals and all of that kind of stuff. So for a handful of years, I was kind of doing that. About a year and a half, 2 years, I was working on that stuff. Initially from LA, but eventually moved back to Michigan. And then all the while, I was continuing to immerse myself in, the different layers of what's possible around the whole system design stuff. And I'd say about a year into that, I think I was still in LA at the time. I got connected with another person who's now my partner in my most recent business venture, which is called Biome. And we came together to say, like, okay, what does it look like to build a sort of best practices, standard operating procedure for designing and building out eco villages and communities and things like that, or even like regenerative hospitality and all those different types of layers. So, during that time, I was deeply immersed in that sort of exploration, and me and him started to come together to start to build the frameworks for what that could look like. Yeah. And then so, after I kind of got a little burnt out on LA, and I was like, okay, I think I need to go back to Michigan. So I ended up moving back here, and when I initially came back here, I was looking at exploring, the hospitality stuff, on my parents' land. They have a 10-acre spot on a river. It's really beautiful. So we were looking at doing some tiny cabins and little spots that we could start to rent out in that way. And so I started exploring that, and all while, still working on the grime stuff and flying back and forth, and then working on the biome stuff and starting to build the framework out with my partner Josh. And the last, I'd say, year and a half, 2 years, I don't know, time is elusive. I've been working with Josh on that, and so that's kind of brings me up to the most recent layer, which is, after the grime stuff, started shifting my focus entirely on biome. Um, yeah, that kind of brings us up to the modern moment
Mhm.
in a sense. And all the while, I mean, through all of that, over the last, I'd say 8 years or so, I've been exploring so many different layers of things. And
Mhm.
through the sort of cementing around what biome could be, I also started to cement a handful of other narratives around what some of the other tools and solutions can start to look like in a big way. And, I kind of have a sort of now 10-year roadmap, I'd say, around what it looks like to sort of start to roll out a larger solution set that hopefully creates a foundation, doesn't necessarily solve the problems, but at least creates a foundation for starting to explore what those solutions can look like in action. And, that looks like everything from, software side to how do you manage teams, through to the AI, through to the hardware solutions, through to manufacturing and building out buildings and robotics and all sorts of different fun things that I'm sure we can get into in more detail shortly. But yeah, so that's kind of the high level story of Dylan and kind of where I came from
Amazing.
and how I got here. And
That was
yeah,
proper and thorough.
yeah.
Awesome. It's great to hear. It's great to hear that again because it's been a couple of years or so, maybe more since a period of time where we were pretty much every day and night in a laboratory, just building towards a lot of this together. And so yeah, and so yeah, it's cool just to like hit rewind and play back the tape, so to speak. And kind of see you again from like these eyes now too, It just there's a lot of like I feel value in like a retrospective, with the advantage of like more experience and more wisdom and like time to process, like um leaps of faith and um like kind of foolishly ambitious, like not foolish, but it's like there's a certain level of like just
Maybe.
radical craziness, naivety that you need to get started to on something that is, big and exciting and visionary. And so like, and then whatever things come and the reality checks or whatever come and then you learn your lessons and then you integrate them. But I feel like we keep getting stronger and I certainly feel that way, and I imagine the same for you. Is like every time any one of these projects goes down, like we go through them, and we come out of it a lot, yeah, wiser, and in a way feel, yeah, like more prepared to more refined and more honed in terms of, I would say, like both of us probably share a similar vision and dream for and a worldview, and a recognition of where society is today and why it's that way. And if one wanted to really create impact, what that could look like in terms of the fullest extent of like the most beautiful extreme of like the possibility space and then like the reality of like bringing that into execution in life. And there's not many of us, but there's plenty of us, so yeah, really great to hear the recap. So now we've arrived at Biome, which I think you launched on social media publicly, website and all, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, roughly. Seems like roughly. So
Hmm.
yeah, at this point too, like you can feel free to share your screen as well if you want to like show the people, like show the website, which I think is gorgeous. And I haven't opened up that deck that you sent over, so if you want to like even share some of that, just to give us a sense of what it is you're creating with Biome and what Biome is. So tell us about Biome.
Cool. Yeah, here, let me prepare a few things, I guess. And the website isn't like, that's pretty old actually at this point. It's like probably a year or so old,
Oh, really?
but we're going to update that soon. But yeah, we did just launch the social media aspect of things and are in the process of redesigning the website and a handful of other things. But really excited about the Instagram stuff and kind of what we're starting to do with that. And then, yeah, and then the deck I sent you is kind of a whole other project altogether, but it kind of fits under the Biome umbrella in a sense. But we can get more into that in a second.
Yeah.
Let's see. So yeah, let's see here. So just to start, yeah. So at a high level, Biome is a project that I started with a friend of mine named Josh Smith. He's based in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm based in Northern Michigan, so kind of similar regions in a sense. But we came together. After a handful of conversations, we just kind of hit it off and saw that we were both taking this sort of whole systems approach and had these sort of grand visions for what it looks like to design this sort of infrastructure around, the sort of best practices, standard operating procedure, roadmap of, what does it look like to build an ideal village or community
Mm.
specifically from the sustainable, regenerative, ecosystem oriented approach, and taking that really high level view and then being able to put that into action across a handful of different layers of everything from the brand to the pitch decks to the websites to the 3D modeling and
Hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. And he himself, my partner, has a background in sort of branding and stuff as well. And that's sort of my background is like, agency side, creative, sort of general Swiss Army knife. We're both coming from that sort of multidisciplinary design thinking space. And so we just came together and really hit it off. And, he was talking to me at the time and we had just come together just to kind of meet each other and just talk about what we were working on. And he had showed me some of the stuff that he had explored around the village stuff. And I showed him some of my stuff. And we just really clicked. And he was like, it'd be really great to start a, studio that just designs eco villages. Because I kind of asked him what his dream was. And he was like, it's my dream to do this. And then I was like, all right, well, let's do it.
Mm.
And so we did. And so
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
started down that road. like I said, probably about a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago. I don't know exactly how long ago, but and just started building, and so we've been building ever since. And initially we came into it, and I can share the website really quick. Initially, we kind of
Mm,
came into it from the perspective of looking at starting the property visualization and branding side. So we kind of honed in on that as the sort of narrative initially.
hmm
What does it look like to do different 3D modeling of different things, and then to be able to build the brands and the pitch decks and all the stuff around that.
hmm
And so we went really heavily into the visualization side of things. Um, and we're still kind of sitting in that, it's kind of our initial approach. And so that's kind of where we're at
Okay.
currently
And
still.
who are like the customers and clients of Biome?
Yeah. So, well, our first kind of bigger client that we got in was we helped this brand right here called GeoShip. So we helped them sort of with their rebrand and their website and stuff. And then this video that you see here. Oh wait, I didn't. I got to share a different tab. Yeah, so this is GeoShip, and so we kind of helped them build out this website, and we did this video for them and a handful of their like 3D assets, like this kind of stuff. And so we kind of helped with that. And initially, we had done this around the concept of like they have like a 70-acre plot of land in Mill Valley in California, and they wanted to do a sort of mock-up of what it could look like to have a sort of geoship community on that land. So we went ahead and kind of got that land and created this sample with it that kind of looks at, what does it look like to have this beautiful community space. And yeah, so we had taken a real location. So this is actually the land that they have. And we brought it into Unreal Engine and sort of made it real and yeah, helped build that out. So that's kind of the things that we've been doing. And like I said, we're still pretty new, so we don't have a ton of clients under the belt, but we're in talks with a lot of different people, all over the world, specifically, looking, I guess, back here, who we serve is regenerative communities, eco hospitality, and immersive spaces. So we're looking kind of really heavily into those types of things. And a lot of the clients that we're talking to right now are people with, a couple hundred acres of land and they're looking to build out a community.
I'm looking at the GeoShip website right now, and I definitely see like the biome touch, and not only in terms of the visual language and aesthetics of it, which are so clean and elegant, and to me reflects like the beauty of nature. Like the beauty, it feels like a beautiful meadow if it was the essence of that was translated into a digital environment, and it really has that. So like hats off to you guys, really well done. And it's really nice to see, as I remember conversations we were having where we were looking at different companies and products and players, I guess, in this world, in this space, and kind of lamenting just the lack of branding quality, and it just how it kind of lamenting like how their presentation did not do them justice. And it's wonderful to see at least this first client get that upgrade so that when people come into touch with this incredible visionary and I would say argued like very necessary um work that it's being presented in a way that's worthy of just how amazing a lot of these ideas are. And so that's like something that strikes me right away. And yeah, other thoughts are coming to mind as well. So okay, so I guess the story is you took on GeoShip as kind of the first, I guess, biggest client, and brought their website and their presentation up to a higher level. And yeah, maybe I think that's what you'd set up until that part. But what's next from here? Like, so you've done this work with GeoShip.
Yeah, and so we're in talks with a handful of clients, like I said, around that have, multi-hundred acre properties and what it looks
Hmm.
like for us to be able to come in and start to master plan at that layer. And, through this process, we've talked to a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas, and not everyone sort of has the same vision as us, right? Everyone has their own version of what that could look like. So for me personally, I was like, okay, so what does it look like for us to, take something under our own belt and like actually let's run a project through Biome that we have full control over.
Mm.
And so that kind of gets me to the deck that I sent you, which
Hmm.
goes into my vision of what it could look like to sort of take some land where I'm based currently in northern Michigan and sort of put the
Hmm.
Biome stamp on it.
Mm.
And we're sort of using it as a case study that's a sort of multi-phased approach where, and I can share the deck here in a second, but where we're looking at, a few different properties that will combine, it's not ideal in the sense that it's not just like a couple hundred acres open land where you can kind of go in and do all this stuff, but it's a sort of, parceled out approach. But the location itself is really phenomenal.
Mm.
And so you can see what you're seeing there is the sort of vision of taking this old yeah, if you go to the before, so taking this old property that's been sitting vacant for about 10 years and sort of turning it into
Wow.
this beautiful space.
Wow.
And the cool thing about this is that this is a little town called Empire, Michigan. It's based in the dunes, the Sleeping Bear
Hmm.
Dunes in northern Michigan, sort of
Mm.
tucked right in the middle of the dunes, and it's a really beautiful location. On the other side of like the back side of these buildings, on the other side of the hill is the lake. So it's Lake
Mm.
Michigan. It's right there. The little street that you see right there on the map, that's the street that goes to the lake. And so every summer, this has, a couple million people coming through driving down that specific street because they're
Oh,
going
wow.
to that beach. And so it's
Hmm.
a really prime location, and it's really, it's a small little town. It's like 300 people, really amazing people, really beautiful area, and
Mm.
it's really a really exciting opportunity to be able to come in and do this. And I've been looking for properties around Michigan for, probably the last 5 or 6 years. I've been just looking all over the place. And when I finally
Hmm.
found this one, I was like, this is amazing to be able to, come in here and really create something that, is community oriented. It's a big thing for us is that it's community owned.
Yeah.
And so it's a new sort of model that we're looking at. What does it look like to do this type of project in a really unique way from the
Amazing.
top down, from the bottom up, right? It's like we want to be able to come in and do it at a high quality of excellence, but then we also want to give that value to the region,
Hmm.
and really have it be, fully owned and integrated by the people who live there, by the surrounding communities. Because, like I said, it's small, it's 300 people, but it's right in the middle of, it's about 30 minutes from Traverse City, Michigan, which is a beautiful town in northern Michigan.
Mm.
And then, Frankfurt and Beulah and, kind of all the way down the coast. There's a lot of really wonderful little beach towns.
Mm.
But the unique thing about this is that, the downtown is sort of two streets, and at the end of, it's one street, two sides, and at the end of that street is this property. Right.
Wow.
So it kind of sits in the middle of the downtown, and it's been sitting empty forever. And the downtown doesn't have a grocery store, it doesn't have anything like that. So what we're looking at doing is putting in, so right there in the center is going to be the grocery store and cafe,
Uh-huh.
and it's going to have a rooftop garden, um, solar panels, those types of things. And then the building to the right is the barn, and we're going to turn that into a bar and restaurant. And then the upstairs is going to be an event space. And then
Wow.
the building in the back is a greenhouse. And then the buildings off to the left side over there are going to be a little spa. So we'll have, cold plunges and saunas and massage kind of stuff. And then the
Mm.
whole thing is going to be set up. You can kind of see the outdoors there. It's like set up like a really beautiful kind of community park.
Mm.
mixing permaculture techniques with agroforestry and then really high-end landscape design. Tucked up there behind will be a handful of small little cabins. And if you kind of scroll down to the appendix at the bottom, you can kind of see there's some more photos down there of kind of the different layers of what we're looking at. So, the grocery store, really beautiful. We're looking
Yeah.
at sort of the models like Air One out in Los Angeles and things like that. How can we do really wonderful grocery store, cafe, yeah, community garden space. We want to do outdoor venue as well. Um, and then the greenhouse itself is a really unique thing because it allows for, you know, northern Michigan gets cold in the winters, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
summers it's super busy, but in the winters, it kind of dies down and becomes a ghost town. But we're hoping
Mm-hmm.
that the greenhouse itself can kind of serve as a not a place to necessarily grow food as much, which we will
Mm-hmm.
do, but it's a place that we can host events, that we can host dinner parties, that we can have people come and hang out and have a cup of coffee in the middle of the winter, essentially in a tropical jungle forest vibes, right?
Mm.
And so the hope that in doing that is it becomes a destination not only in the summertime but year round. And that
Mm.
will allow us to fill in that gap a bit. And so that kind of serves a unique, purpose in that regard. And some of the imagery there is from a place in southern Michigan called Granner Farms, and they do this. And so they've shown it's a pretty good model for how you can run this stuff year round, which
Mm.
is exciting. And then below that, yeah, the natural
Oh.
cabins and the timber cabins. So we're looking at integrating different approaches for some of the extra buildings that we're going to be building. Hempcrete, ramders, straw bale construction, standard timber frame construction, um, and hoping to make those really beautiful and sort of
Wow.
luxurious short-term stays so that we can kind of have that going on as well.
Mm.
And then the barn itself is a very beautiful barn, very open. We want to kind of keep the upstairs really open, have a big event space, be able to host, musicians and talks and all sorts of different things like that. And then the downstairs
Mm-hmm.
will be this sort of bar and restaurant. And then, yeah, at the end, there's sort of the vibes for the spa and wellness centers.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a pretty holistic vision of like what does it look like to build a sort of, it's not the full eco village, but it's sort of like the downtown, so to speak, right? It's like what are the
Mm.
things that a community needs to
Mm-hmm.
sort of thrive? And it needs places to gather, it needs places to eat, it needs food, it needs we'll probably also be doing some sort of shared office space on top of the grocery store with the sort of outdoor garden and the rooftop garden stuff. And so there's a lot of different layers to it. And the idea as well is that because it's community owned and because of the unique infrastructure that we're setting up, we're able to sort of take the off seasons, maybe the grocery store is running a little bit slower and the bar is doing better or vice versa, or we can sort of offset our costs in those ways where everything's under the same umbrella and everything's kind of supporting itself and each other. And so
Yeah.
maybe the short-term stays are making more money and they can help offset certain costs. Because a big thing for me is, in addition to the community ownership, is I also want it to be owned by the staff, and I also want to make sure that it's really high
Mm.
paying. We're looking at how we can set a new standard for the region as far as minimum wage is concerned,
Mm.
and be able to do all of these sorts of different things and make it
Mm-hmm.
a sort of model of what's possible in this sense of like, what does it look like to do a regenerative bioregional hub that can serve as all of these different layers for a community? And then ideally, long term, we're going to kind of take this and make it an open source model that we can scale around the state and eventually around the country. So we're looking into, like, how we're structuring this is unique enough where we're able to sort of create our own zoning overlays and create our own economic models and our own sort of infrastructure where it's all multi-layered and there's multiple businesses and it's all interoperating with itself. And then also looking at once it's up and running, what is the software layer that runs it all? Like what is the point of
Mm-hmm.
sale for the grocery store and the businesses, and how does that all run, and how do we build that in a really strategic way, using
Right.
things like AI and newer technologies like and blockchain stuff as well.
Yeah.
to be able to kind of track and trace all of this and build these sort of liquidity layers and you know and build businesses at all layers, right? You know, the grocery store and cafe and stuff, like they're going to have their own brands, they're going to have their own things that they can sell not only locally but nationally as well.
Right.
And everything that we're looking at is really holistic in that sense, you know, even down to the, you know, we have to do our own wastewater treatment facility. So it's like our wastewater treatment facility, we're exploring bioalgae, or algae farms to do like some of the remediation stuff. And
Mm.
so there's just all different layers. And, you know, when you do that, it's like, okay, now we have the algae and we can do things like biofuel, or we can do fertilizers mixing with biochar. And so we're making sure that every layer of the business has multiple businesses stacked within it. And so that builds such a level of abundance for everyone involved that it becomes this thing that can grow and expand and evolve over time and become truly community owned and become an asset of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, this is sort of serving as the first sort of test case for Biome to see something through from plan through development, you know, all the way into operations. And so we
Mm.
really want to see what that looks like. And in addition to this property, you know, there's another property about 50 feet down the road that we're also looking at. That's another 15 acres. And on that 15 acres, we're looking at doing a pocket neighborhood. And so this will kind of serve as the downtown model, and then that other property could potentially serve as the sort of living standard model. And so this allows us to then explore all of the different layers necessary, you know, that would be necessary in building out an eco village, but in this sort of, you know, more standard model way that a lot of people are more used to. And so it allows us sort of bridge that gap between the sort of game A and game B models and do it in
Mm.
a really strategic way.
Uh-huh.
And so that'll be coming a bit later. There's going to be, I don't have a lot of that stuff fleshed out yet, but you know, we're in the processes of that over the next few weeks, and so I'll be exploring what that can look like in a deeper way. And
Uh-huh.
then we're additionally hoping to partner with the Village of Empire in a much deeper way to allow this to become something again that allows the city or the community at large to flourish. It's not really a city; it's
Uh-huh.
300 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that looks
Amazing.
like if we can build in profit models where some of that profit gets pooled and distributed to what the community wants it to be distributed to, right? You know, whether
Right.
that's to the fire department or whatever sort of
Uh-huh.
local infrastructure that's necessary, fixing roads or whatever, really, you know? And so
Uh-huh.
it's not about building, you know, capitalist models that feed the top, you know, 1%. It's about taking the money that would go to the top 1%'s yachts and redistributing it to the community and to the employees and to the different people that are going to participate at all the different layers. So yeah, so I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be, you know, the sort of premier sort of example of what, you know, Biome is capable of bringing to the world. And, you know, we have a really phenomenal team that we're bringing together, you know, working with Terremoto Landscaping from out in LA. They're going to come in as landscaping partner. We have an amazing architect called Studio Bardo. They're based out in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're building out just a really phenomenal, you know, team to allow us to execute this at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it's pretty exciting.
Incredible, incredible. So much to say and so many questions, but I'm looking at your project timeline and it seems like you're roughly at the fundraising stage of things still.
Yep. We're
Okay.
at the fundraising stage where a lot of this isn't really public yet, even.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
come May, we're going to do, you know, May to June, we're going to do a sort of private round of fundraising. We're going to, you know, have that maybe be more of a national or international investors if they want to come in. So I'm reaching out to my larger network to make that happen. And that's going to be for phase 0 and phase 1.
Mm-hmm.
Phase 0 is essentially the, you know, procurement of the property and all the due diligence and the first round of master planning. And then the phase 1 will be the sort of restoring what's there already
Mm-hmm.
before building the next layers, which will be the secondary buildings like the greenhouses and the spa and the cabins.
Right.
We're going to announce this publicly locally in June. And then from there, we're going to open up, a few different types of investment rounds. So we'll have the sort of accredited investors, and then we'll have the community investors that are the non-accredited
Mm,
investors. So we'll be able to allow people, you know, I don't know what the minimum investment is going to look like yet, but maybe anywhere from 500 to 1,000, minimum
amazing.
investment. And that allows a lot of people to get in at the ground floor, whether they're accredited or not. And we're hoping to raise probably a total initially of around 12 to 15 million.
Hmm.
And so that's going to look like getting, taking care of some of that first phase 1 and 2 stuff. And then, it'll be pretty profitable. These projections that you're seeing right here are kind of old, but either way, the older projections are still a good example of what's possible when you start to do this
Right.
in the right way. And so, it's I think it's a really unique project, and I'm hoping again that it can serve as a sort of example of what's possible, and,
Hmm.
and be a
Hmm.
jumping off point to kind
I
of
love
take
it.
this model and scale it, all over the place.
Yeah.
And we're doing it with that intention, right? Like everything's going to be incredibly open source and made available to the public, and everything's going to be really hyper well documented. And we're going to kind of go through that whole process and kind of share that with the community at large.
Incredible. Wow. Bravo. And thank you, Dylan Tull, for your ceaseless dedication to um, this this vision. It's, yeah, I think this is a wonderful example in a very specific sort of project or, use case or application case of really like the philosophy, the principles, and I suppose like what I see here is a story of somebody who sees not only the big picture, but all of the granular details and how to knit them together in a way that can truly bring revitalization and super abundance, to and showing a new way, and and going from beyond like idea and theory into the real world application, and you've been relentlessly working towards that, and there's a beautiful heart behind all of that at its core, which is to bring people up and to you know and I guess to be who you are and to see all of that is possible, and then to go to war in the world of atoms uh, and physics and to try and move reality in that direction. And there's all kinds of challenges that I'm sure you'll be coming up against or have come up against, as far as even just like you know getting people to believe that this is possible and not too ambitious or not too whatever, insert adjective. Because yeah, I for one believe in it, and that it's sometimes it's almost like we've talked about this too, where it's almost like it's almost like triggers this part of us that's like it's too good to be true, or it's like we're not used to thinking in this level of prosperity and beauty and abundance. And I think, you challenge that, and I think whenever someone sees your work, or often when people see your work, it feels like it's so amazing that I think it also alerts some part of, I don't know, something. I don't have quite the words for it right now. I know this is something that you've come up against a lot. I think you've spoken to, it challenges our own perhaps sense of worth, self-worth,
Mhm.
and what we consider as possible. But as I'm seeing this, I think a couple other questions come to mind. Feel free to interrupt if and interject if you want to, express anything. But what's coming up for me? Well, one, I am curious just to ask or to know, like, you know, how many projects do you have going at the moment? If this is kind of say like the flagship or the sort of first step and in the model. You mentioned the GeoShip kind of branding and rebranding and supporting them in that capacity. And then you have this one, which is really hands-on, like taking a piece of land, with your hands and taking this sort of soups and nuts approach to every aspect of it, from the governance to the community ownership model, which I think is incredible and such a game changer. But yeah, are there other projects that you have ongoing right now?
Yeah, I mean, we have a handful of client projects as well. And then I have a handful of other personal projects. I mean, you know me
Oh,
well enough to
nice.
know that I
Yeah.
always have my hands in all sorts of pots.
17 other Pride projects. Yeah.
That said, I mean, this is serving as the sort of main focus point alongside of Biome, you know, but I do have a sort of, like I said, 5 or 10 year roadmap of what it looks like to roll out a series of other layers of things
Yeah.
that I can kind of lightly touch on.
Sure.
I don't know how deep. I mean, I can go deep on all of them, I'm sure, but how
How
much
about
time
give
we
us
have?
a high level taxonomy and then, you know.
Yeah. So ultimately, you know, I see this project as a way to sort of prove our capacity to achieve something tangible in the real world, you know, not
Mm,
necessarily on a today's scale, but on the next 3 to 5 years scale. You know,
mhm,
as we're able to break ground on this and start to build this out, it's going to serve as a sort of jumping off point for, you know, a handful of other things.
mm,
The biggest thing that I think that will come from this is I'm really deeply looking into how the biome infrastructure can serve as a baseline for taking the teams that we have that are doing Unreal Engine and that kind of stuff, and then bringing in an even bigger team to sort of build out our own game engine, game layer that can simulate and run procedural engine stuff around designing eco villages and communities and things like that.
hmm,
So really heavily looking at, so like, okay, you know, what if we could fly a drone over your land and do a LiDAR scan and bring that into a game engine and be able to run, you know, cellular automata, mathematics, you know, slime mold stuff to create all the pathways and all the different
mm,
roads and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, be able to have a sort of procedural engine of like, okay, we need 10 homes and we need 5 big community buildings and we need all this kind of stuff. And you'd be able to
mm,
essentially talk to it like you would ChatGPT,
mm,
um, and have that conversation with it to say, you know, what is, yeah, like to essentially give your parameters, right? Like we
mhm,
have this type of soil and we have access to wood or we have access to, you know, straw or whatever it is. And you can be like, okay, well then you can do a straw bale construction home in this way. And
wow.
and all of that stuff is sort of built into the engine itself. And so you can have that
Mm,
conversation and it will create the sort of floor plans, frameworks, and all of that stuff automatically,
mm,
and have it be to an engineering spec, standard architecture spec, right? Fully engineered. And I think that makes it really exciting to be able to do that at that scale. And then that serves as sort of one piece in a bigger picture, which is like, okay, once we have the procedural engine, now we've got to
mhm,
build it. And
mm,
so once we have that information, what does it look like to plug that into a bioregional manufacturing facility? And
mhm,
so this bioregional manufacturing facility can then take, you know, all of your designs and deliver your whole city, a panelized construction of your whole city to yourself, to the community, and maybe it's all built with robots and it's all able to come in and be fully assembled in a short period of time, like to a certain spec,
wow.
to a certain standard. And so I'm really looking at that sort of pipeline is like once we have the procedural side figured out, then we can work on the manufacturing side. And then in that world, you know, if we get into the manufacturing side of things, I'm looking at what does it look like to not only be able to build buildings, but to be able to build everything else, right? Furniture, toothbrushes, carpets, you know, whatever that you might
Mhm,
need to then furnish those buildings or build out that community. And specifically from the lens of, you know, biomaterials like, you know, hemp, mycelium, bacteria, and all these types of things. Like, how can we come up with new types of 3D printing for hemp plastics and recycling methods for things and integrating that into this sort of circular economics model of like, okay, you know, not only are we able to get our house delivered to us in this way, but we're able to, you know, get everything else and it's all biodegradable as necessary. And there's all these different layers to that and sort of setting a new industry standard specifically on the state side of what manufacturing can look like for consumer goods. And so like when you look at
mm,
that, it's really profound because, you know, a lot of the stuff that's going on right now in the world with the ports and the tariffs and all this kind of stuff, we're in a really interesting moment in time. where there's an opportunity for us to bring manufacturing back stateside. And what does that start to look like? And so I'm looking really heavily at what's happening in the, aerospace kind of world and in the defense contractors world, like looking at Anduril just opened a huge factory, or they didn't open, but they're breaking ground on a huge factory in Ohio. But again, all these companies are focused on, defense tech, autonomous drones and things. And none of this really helps the people on the ground on the day to day. It's great for our defense and whatnot, but it's not great for how we can actually manufacture consumer goods. And that's where most of our manufacturing, that's what's on most of those containers that are now not coming, to Long Beach. And
Mm,
so I think that we're perfectly positioned to be able to do that. And so right now I'm
mm,
looking at 3 different properties around the country. One of them's in Detroit, one of them's in Laguna Niguel, California, and another one is in Marin County, north of San Francisco. And I'm looking at these 3 different properties as sort of serving as the sort of base model properties. I don't know which one will come first. Thinking Detroit will come first just because of the narrative of it, of like, Detroit was the origin point of industry at one point, and it only makes
mm,
sense to me that it becomes that origin point again, right? As we're talking about what manufacturing looks like, it's like, yes, Detroit is the place for that.
mhm,
So really looking heavily into that. And so this project in Empire is a sort of jumping off point into being like, look what we can do at scale. And then now look what we can do when we bring in AI and robotics and really brilliant people around the material science layers to really build out something truly profound on that level. And so that's kind of the big picture vision is, over the next decade or so, it's like I want to really be able to start to build out some of those facilities, or maybe many facilities. And again, with the same approach that I'm
mhm.
taking with the Empire project, it's all going to be open source and scalable and accessible to people. Take our model and spin it up in your own community, because the more of these
Yeah.
bioregional manufacturing hubs that we have, the more we become self-sustaining, the more that we're able to really, take back control of what, building our lives really can look like in this new sort of holistic circular economic paradigm. So that's kind of what I'm really excited about. And I think that that's coming a little bit later. I'll probably have a lot of that stuff fleshed out, by the end of this year, as
Mm,
far as the business plans and the different opportunities for that, and hoping to take some of the investors and things for this initial project and the initial pocket neighborhood and stuff, and start to
mm,
expand those into this bigger vision, around all of that. And, simultaneously, I'm in lots of talks with all sorts of different people with different eco villages and different projects. And so there's a lot of conversations going around what does it look like to start to film all of this and document it all and build a TV series or films and all sorts of other layers around that. So it's like, what do the media arms start to look like? And so I am thinking about sort of all these different layers in the stack and what
mhm,
that can really be. And then, longer term vision in a way, shorter term in others, is the sort of, software layer to all of that, right?
mm,
And so how are you managing the robotics and the manufacturing? And then you get into conversations around shipping and delivery, and there's autonomous vehicles, and there's so many different things that are coming out that we can really start to explore how to integrate that all at scale in a bioregional sense.
mhm,
And then on top of that, there's the software layer of like, okay, now we're entering the world of artificial intelligence. And
mhm,
in this world, we're given essentially a very biased models from these big companies that sort of train us to think that we have access to information, but we really don't, right? It's really problematic in that sense. And so another thing that
mm,
I've been exploring alongside of these projects is what does it look like to build out a sort of decentralized semantic RAG training infrastructure, and it looks like to me a sort of social media sort of experience, but in a new way where we're bringing all of your current like profiles into one place. So essentially what I'm currently working on is twofold. I got an MVP that I'm working on, which is going to be a 3D globe and a force graph that we're going to be mapping the entire regenerative movement onto. And that includes,
mm,
permaculture experts, architects, natural builders, but then also philosophers, meta-crisis theorists, and all these types of things. And we're going to build that out. And then once we have that built out, we're going to build on top of that. The goal is to build on top of that a sort of AI layer that allows us to communicate with that information, right? So then you'd be like, show me the top 10 permaculture experts in my region who love, dogs or whatever, whatever random thing, and be able to see that. And then within the system, be like, okay, can you send them a proposal, of what it might look like to work with them, or I have this project, and the system will have its own, built-in standard operating procedures and things like
Mm-hmm.
that to allow this all to happen really strategically and really quickly. And it will allow you to sort of get a heads up display on things. And then
Uh,
through that, we're looking at what does it look like then to take the individuals on that map and give that information to them, right? So what does it look like to then give people access to their own information and their own data? And so from that lens, we're looking at, truly agentic data infrastructure where we can have our own servers, our own essentially data centers where that information can be stored and accessed and shared in whatever ways that we want or we choose. So it's giving people back the ownership of their data. It's then also simultaneously aggregating their data in real time. So essentially what you do is you set up an automated scraper bot that's constantly tracking you across the internet. So anytime you're on a podcast, anytime you post a YouTube video or anything on Twitter, it's going to aggregate that all into one centralized database that you have full control of. And then from there, you get to choose where that information goes and how it's used. And that creates a really profound effect where now we can build trust graphs around who has access to our data. And then we can start to share that in really unique ways. And we can build marketplaces on top of that where it's like, me and 10 friends are all trusted advisors of whatever sort of thing. We can then train an AI model on that information and put that up on a marketplace, or we can make it open source and available for free. And there's all sorts of ways that value can then be, tracked and aggregated and brought back to its origin point of like where that data truly came from. And you can build all this sort of fractal value and wealth on top of that. And so that I think could be a really profound thing. And it could serve as a sort of model, not only for normal individuals to get their data back, but for experts. And that's where you get into decentralized science and what it can look like for peer-to-peer review to have this sort of layer to it that then, a peer-to-peer reviewed set of information gets used to train a model that then is the sort of industry standard of that model, and the communities can vote on them. And there's all sorts of different things that you can start to do and implement in a really profound way. And then over time, a period of, let's say that's working at scale to some degree over a period of years, you now have really, really well-trained, human in the loop data. And that makes it so that those AIs are so much more intelligent. It makes it so you can have these sort of what I'm referring to as like bioregional AI oracles. And then you get into the hardware side where it's like once you have those training sets, you can start to spin out hardware, similar to what like the daylight computer people are doing where they're removing the blue light. I have some friends that work over there, and we're potentially going to be talking to their teams hopefully in the coming months. But the idea is, how can we then build our own hardware layer on top of that? And then that serves as a sort of hardware layer and software layer to the communities that we're building out through the bioregional manufacturing and through all these other
mm,
layers.
copy.
And so it's sort of like is this multi-tier approach where it's like, let's build the infrastructure, and let's build the solutions on top of it. Let's build the coordination and collaboration mechanisms. Let's build the ability to train ourselves and train the data properly to have access to that in a bioregional sense. And then that removes the need for things like internet access and other things. I mean, you still probably want that, but it's like you now have these sort of bioregional oracles that they know your soil type and they've been trained by the best permaculture experts. All of these different sorts of layers start to make it an incredibly valuable thing where it's like anything that you have to do in the real world, you essentially have a blueprint for. And it's not only, a standard blueprint, it's probably one of the most highly curated, best blueprints of the best sort of procedural way of doing it,
Mm,
which becomes really exciting. And so at that point, when we're able to solve for all these things, and like I said, I say 10-year goal, this could be a 30-year goal. Like this could be a
or
long shot.
a lifetime body of
Yeah, yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's however this gets rolled out and structured, I'm open to that. And it's all an emergent process and it's all
Yeah.
collaborative. And there's, hundreds of different people that I'm going to be speaking with and bringing on boards over the next few years.
Mhm.
But it's sort of a pretty clear, at least in my mind, a pretty clear roadmap of what's possible.
Mhm.
And then kind of built on top of all of that is a sort of new model for, how do you actually do all this now, right? Now you need money.
Mm.
And so, you need to have something that's funding all of that. So I'm really heavily immersed in the sort of venture capital, angel investment, family offices, pension funds, all this type of stuff. What does it
Mm,
look like to sort of give that all a sort of infrastructure that we can run these types of solutions through?
mhm,
And it's not only these specific solutions, but it's a broad set of solutions around, all of the tertiary, things that would be a part of these worlds, and which is infinite things, right? You can kind of see how that scales out indefinitely. But the
mm,
idea is sort of redefining venture capital, redefining investment, and changing the narrative into a sort of post scarcity ergodic fractal infrastructure that allows you to invest in actually I had a call today with someone and she made this she said this sample which was really beautiful. She said, would you rather invest in a potted plant or in a forest? Right. And so right now the standard model is they invest in all these little potted plants and they're all about them thriving, and if one of the potted plants dies they go to another. But wouldn't you much rather invest in the forest, because the forest has the mycelial network, it has all these layers built in
mm,
already, and so if one of the trees dies you have 1,000 others and they're all there and they're all
mhm,
helping each other out. And so
mhm,
that's kind of like how I'm looking at it. And so, what does that look like to build that sort of legacy philanthropic investment engine that can
mhm,
serve as that, for the
mhm,
people and be community owned, in the international sense. Now we're getting to a much bigger audience. Like now we need to bring in hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into an infrastructure to be able to scale out these solutions.
yeah,
It looks like something truly profound.
I agree.
And so, the name of that fund is called Axia, which is Greek for the word value. And so it's the idea of the redefinition of value and the redefining of capital. So it's looking at, 8 different types of capital, everything from human capital to built capital, natural capital, et cetera. And so that I think can serve as a sort of umbrella from the top down. And, as the step one, this empire project serves as the bottom up. It's like, this is how we do it
Mm,
with a few businesses. And this is how we federate those businesses. And this is how we share the profits through those businesses. And it's looking at stuff like Mondragon, which is a federated, company based out of Europe. And they've been around since the 50s. And they're probably one of the biggest examples of, how to do something like this and federate this stuff. Mind you, they don't have necessarily the funding layer mixed in, but they have the sort of solutions at the business scale kind of worked out. And there's a handful of others similar to that we're kind of exploring. But what does it start to look like to take these models and to scale them around the world and to build the sort of infrastructure to be able to do this?
mm,
So yeah, so I know I just said a shitload of stuff and there's all sorts of different layers to it, and
yeah.
it's a big picture thing, and there's a lot to it. So
Mhm, 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 mhm,
but it's sort of in my mind, I sort of have it phased out and different, broken into different categories. And, I've got a pretty clear vision. I feel like when I was at Mothership, I was getting glimpses of it. And now I feel like
mm,
it's fully revealed itself to me in that sense of like, okay,
mm,
this is what's possible. This is how it's going to work. This is what the story looks like. This is what the narrative looks like. This is what all the brands look like. Like it's all really emerging really rapidly. And being able to use tools like AI tools and things myself, it allows me to
mhm,
scale things even quicker. And it allows us also to redefine, the capacity of what one person can get done, right? And if someone would be like, that's way too much for one person to handle, it's like, yeah, but you're not considering the world that we're about to enter into with robotics and AI and what's actually going to become possible. Like our capacity is going to become exponential. And not only
infinite
that,
labor, infinite cognition.
yeah. And not only that, like our team's capacities are going to become infinite, right? So it's like now a team of 10 people can do what a team of 1,000, it used to take a team of 1,000 if those 10 people are really proficient in these new technologies. And so I don't think people realize that. And so once people start to understand that, they're going to start to look and be like, oh, wow, like we can get way more done. And these aren't necessarily these big pie in the sky dreams when you have the infrastructure to be able to manage that in really unique ways. And a lot of these tools have yet to emerge, but I'm tracking a lot of the potential threads that may lead to some of these bigger solutions and building, obviously, a lot of them myself with a handful of others. And yeah, I don't know, I'm really excited. I think that we live in one of the most profoundly fascinating moments in human history. And
Absolutely.
and we're able to, do so much more. And if you just sit and take the time to explore this stuff a little bit, you start to understand what's truly possible. And I do see within my lifetime the world becoming a vastly different place than what we perceive it as today. And people may,
Blossoming.
yeah, I mean, it's not a multi-generational thing in the sense that it's not going to take, 5 generations for this to take root. I think it's going to happen in one or two. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm stoked.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So the question that's coming up most for me is, I mean, I've always seen you as uh it was super exciting to have to meet when I met you and I really got the news, and the full download, and it was like every day, 3 times a day, that I would hear you go on one of these rants, and just drop off the download, from on high, and in stunning resolution and detail and clarity. And so I'm no stranger to it, and I think it was always very exciting because in Eisenstein's language, it's like the future our hearts know is possible, and what I've known in my soul, and that I've seen in visions, and meeting you was almost like meeting a guy who like had the map to the promised land and had the schematics for the boat that can take us there. And it's like, oh my God, it's real, but it's also still just a blueprint and a schematic that doesn't exist yet. It kind of exists, and now it's on paper and it's well articulated, but it's like it's still a little bit intangible, right? And so, but I just am one of these people who, was like, I believe in that, and I will live and die for that, and that's it's just really, I can't think of anything else more worthwhile to get behind with all of my resources, limited as they are. I just don't, yeah, there's nothing else there's nothing more worth doing and working towards. And honestly, I guess even grounded in reality, sometimes we get the feedback that we're too pie in the sky. We need to bring it down to earth and get reality check, but it's also, I think, when you consider where the world is and where we're going and where we are in the I don't know, evolutionary process, when you take all that into consideration, like, this is the most realistic thing to be doing, and this is the most worthwhile thing to be doing. And if we can get enough people to agree on that, then I think, we reach critical mass. And so that's something that, I've been on quite a journey. Like, I have also been in this period. Like, I feel like I've always had the seed of what we're now talking about. This has been a seed that's been inside of me in one form or another for many years, like, over 10 years. As far as like being in my early 20s and kind of just having these aha moments of, I don't know, almost like a domino effect. Maybe it was in a mushroom induced state of like one realization leading to another, and then over time, over years, and seeing then, like, in the real world, an innovation here or an invention here or a company here or an institute there, that it's like working on different aspects of it, and over time collectively starting to see like, wait, if I just draw this out to a logical conclusion, apply a little bit more energy, social capital, all the various forms of capital that you're talking about, then this is very real. And then looking out my window and seeing the very present everyday reality of the people in South Central, and and feeling so much love for them and feeling that they deserve so much more. It's just like this environment of just like constant motivation and a sense of urgency to do this. And so that's the place that I've been coming from. And, it's been business is war, unfortunately, like, at least in the current paradigm that we're in a world of like competition and capitalism and extraction and you know the battle of being both in playing the game A, but working towards the game B. It's like having one foot in two different worlds is like no easy feat. So like being the bridge builders to that is like both an honor, but also, like, I think, a tremendous challenge. And maybe we'll look back at our children or their children and be like, you didn't know how hard it was back in the day, you don't know how good you have it. Hopefully, if we'll have succeeded, and we'll be able to be grumpy old men who can tell people how hard it was. In any case, like, bringing it back to this present moment, I think the biggest question that arises for me, and is the question that's always been there, which is like, what can I do, and how can I contribute, and what station am I meant to kind of hold in this much larger collective effort, you know? And so, like, I guess in a way, um, I'm I'm bringing a question to you, which is like maybe a multi-part question to ask is like, what to you is mothership? What to you is mothership? Where do you see me being of most service and contribution? Like you as somebody who sees a very high altitude picture of this all, and you have some context. Maybe you don't have the latest updates as far as like what's developing here, but you know some of the people involved, and I'm sure you have the same sense that like, okay, this is all these dots are going to connect in some way, and they're all part of this a similar consciousness that's rising. And so anyway, so that's kind of what I would love to get your perspective on is, and maybe I'll just add one little bit of context before you answer that, which is like I'm now arriving at this point of being in this mission and battle to acquire dominion over this little kingdom here of this warehouse and do all the things that we drew out and designed. I reached a point where, let's just say, you know, it's been this process of like figuring out what the language needs to be at this current moment in time to unlock the funding to at least get the journey started so that we can build towards some of these things, right? That's and there's this wisdom that came in around like, how does it go? It's like first do what's necessary, then do what's possible, and then suddenly you're doing the impossible. Okay, accept that wisdom and like, you know, don't scale down like the long-term ambition and vision, but like also be very practical and pragmatic about and realistic with where the world is now. And so build to that and build with that reality in mind. So therein lies the tension I was speaking to earlier. I think now we're at this point where I don't want, you know, to speak too soon, but it seems like in some capacity we'll have access to this place. But what's coming for me is like I gone on this long circuitous journey, lost the plot for a minute, you know, in the midst of a lot of things going down. And as far as how to achieve a lot of this, and now it's like all these things that happened and are coming back together and reconnecting and recrystallizing. I think one of the key realizations I came to was that there's just no running away from this for me
Hmm.
as far as whatever mothership means or what it connotes or what everything that's contained in that, which I think is this conversation is a clue to. So it's like, okay, I can run away from it, but eventually I'm gonna have to come home to this, and I meant to do this. I believe this is why I'm here. So now it's like let's really get back to that mission, and with a new level of conviction and devotion to it, commitment to it, with all the now learned experience and wisdom of the trials and tribulations. So with that being said, then, you know, okay, let's start the conversation. A lot of this like mothership to this point has been if you know, you know, and it's been somewhat behind the scenes. And now I'm saying, you know what? Let's bring this out. Let's start to galvanize. Let's start to enroll people into this, and we're gonna figure it out as we go. So let's throw overthinking and perfectionism a little bit to the wayside, you know, not to say that we don't care about, you know, how we do things, but it's like building almost more from a place of just like real time gut instinct and building on instinct. And it's just sort of back and forth between that and then like also checking into like, okay, let's stop and pause for a moment, evaluate, strategize, and then go back out into action. And so part of that, I think, is like really declaring this moonshot, which you were the one who asked me this question. And I thank you for it, which is like you are like thinking in terms of narrative building, and you were like, mothership, mothership. Okay, well, where's the mothership taking us? And where's it going? And I remember answering, you know, pretty quickly, well, motherland. Of course, it's taking us to the motherland. So I think that's a really rich word and it connotes a lot. And so, like, to me, I said, all right, you know what? Fuck it. Like, I see what like Edge City is doing with their month-long pop-up villages, you know, and I've, you know, mapped out so many different people, the Burning Mans, you know, yeah, even the GeoShip, I think they had a festival as well, Solar Punk Summit, like, you know, there's all these people there in the space doing various types of festivals. And so I said, you know what, like, let's add our verse to it. So I said, kind of put a stake in the ground and I said, spring 2026, Motherland, first pop-up village, 1 year. We're gonna just see where it is, how it is, all that is still to be determined by design, and it's emergent. First, we're just gonna start the conversation, start having it, see who then is attracted to that in terms of an audience, and then enroll some of those people in a co-creative process, and then find where they fit, um, and where their zone of genius is. And so that's kind of like what's cooking up in the meantime. And then in parallel, things that Alan are working on with respect to the warehouse seem to be picking up more and more steam as well, and more resources and energy is now, coming together around this hub and this vortex. And so I know like, okay, these are all gonna like come together in some way. And then like David Sebastian, who you put me onto and kind of turn the lights on for me around who he is, after being in each other's orbit for some time and like randomly running into each other on the street in different places, like every so often, like we finally, I think you saw, but we linked up in New York City, and like, we had the zoom moment where it's like, all right, okay, I don't know why you're here, but I know you're here for a reason. And just like there's a strong resonance and brotherhood. We're actually from the same like half a mile block in South Bay, like we grew up in
Nice.
the same place. We have so much in common. It's been crazy. So anyway, and I talked to him, and he has talked about like, man, I've also, created designs for an eco village and for a commune and for how this is all work. And I'm like, word, okay, cool. Like, so we're all getting the same visions and have the same heart. And so like where I've come to now is like think that, and none of it's never new ideas. It's just coming back around to them to like execute them. I don't, perhaps in a better way, or with a higher level of readiness, or what have you. But the realization I'm having now is like, the question is like, okay, how do we handle, or what's our solution, mothership, this campaign in terms of like funding, and how am I going to, yeah, fund it, and how am I going to fuel this movement in terms of resources, capital, and otherwise. And so I started to map out like a few different scenarios for what it would cost to like do a festival, what it would cost to even ask ChatGPT. Like because I went to Bali and I went to Nuanu, actually. I went in person and experienced it. Murray took me there.
Nice.
And yeah, and I was like, okay, how much did Nuanu cost? And it was like Sergey invested around like $100 million. I was like, okay, word, okay, that's a lot of money. But and just from a childlike place, I was like, I want to do Nuanu too, And so like, how do we get there, ChatGPT? Break it down for me. And of course it did. I was like, incredible, And it's just like, all right, let's start with a $1 to $5 million, phase, and kind of position it as like a creative village prototype, and just breaking it down into smaller pieces and working towards it. So that's sort of like where the thinking is at. The first pop-up could be here at the warehouse, or it could be on some piece of land, but that is yet to be identified. But I also feel like that property already exists somehow, like within 2 degrees of where I sit today. And so there's that thought. But I think that the realization I came to yesterday is like, I think, in answering this question of like, are we getting this funding from like, is it purely sponsorships? Is it a mix of like venture, or is it philanthropy, or is it grants? And maybe it's all the above. But I also am coming around to like the conversation that we've had in the past around like mothership as an agency, as a cultural agency, and I think that's something that I could be very effective at. Um, like take for example like Earth Tuned. They've got those tuning forks, those big tuning forks. Like it's kind of doing like five. It's like maybe this is I'll bleep this part out, but it's like a roughly 5 figure, four to 5 figure business. Erica Badu's got one, like, and that's an example of like a new earth, like simple product that like anyone and everyone can have at a party, at a, and I think, and it's a little tuning fork, right? And so I believe I see this way that like we can blow that product up, or at least like get that out into the culture more broadly than it currently is, through a rebranding, an update and a refresh on that. And then also just doing well executed campaigns with the right artists and with the right audiences. And then suddenly, within a year or two, like 200 rappers and singers, songwriters, and producers. It's just everywhere. Everyone has one. And then what subtle or not so subtle effect does that then have on the energetics? It's going to have a ripple effect, And so to just kind of play that role of almost a broker between curated instruments and products that I think that I see as having bringing in a certain energy, impacting energetics in the way that we see for ourselves in this kind of future direction, and linking that up with culture and driving these kind of impactful moments, be they campaigns or what have you, that also drive sales and grow companies that I think should grow, and I want to see grow. And so like I think that's kind of what I'm seeing is that I can do. So like there's like companies like Earthtune with that product who now they're working on some sort of like so if the Earthtune forks are like in the category of sound, they're also now working on something in the category of light product in that space. So expanding that and bridging that with culture, and then also like I have a friend Mark, Mark McCora, right? Well, he's friend of Andy Cochran's. And Mark is developing a immersive experience around the lore of Jesus Christ, the story, the greatest story ever told, and so it's a Jesus Christ immersive experience, and he had done that. He's done it for Avatar prior to this. He's done Avatar and he did the hip hop 50th anniversary hip hop immersive experience as well. And so he's got a strong track record in that space. And so he's like looking at like the Van Gogh immersive experience, and he's like, okay, that was extremely successful. Now what does it look like to bring this new emerging category of entertainment into with Christianity, which in all of its splendor. So like that's a project too. But I think there's this room that I can bring Mothership forward as a way to generate, yes, revenue and like commercial growth for the whole space and weaving that together. But and then also from that place have Mothership, the cultural agency, be the entity that then produces Motherland. And it's the festival slash pop-up village is, one of our main big flagship projects or something like that. So that's sort of like the mental model and the wayfinding that I'm at right now. And so anyway, just wanted to share all that context with you. I definitely have it in my mind that there's no other person or group or team that I would want to work with on any sort of pop-up village, anything festival, anything other than Biome.
Hmm.
So I'm just gonna plant that seed and speak that into existence.
Well, and
And
we didn't
I
even
just
touch on, well, I was going to say, we didn't even really touch on my other side project company, which is Power Plant.
right. Okay, tell us about Power Plant.
Yeah, so Power Plant is a company that emerged from being on tour with Grimes,
Mm.
partnered with a good friend of hers and then her tour manager of many years. And so the three of us came together around this vision of like, what does it look like to do healthy raves? And so taking the model of, Plur and the rave culture and bringing in this aspect of, adaptogenic elixirs and IV drips and scalar wave frequencies and all these different types of
Yes.
things and be able to merge that with that culture and sort of capitalize on that and bring a sort of healing modality into a space that previously hasn't had that level of healing immersed within it.
Right.
And yeah, so
Health
through
Goth.
that, yeah, and so through that, I've gotten really immersed in what it looks like to produce these types of events. And, we're looking at doing a handful of events this year yet and we're sort of scaling that operation as well simultaneously. And then, there's a lot of other conversations too I'm having with people, that are doing, regenerative events and things like this. And kind of how do we bring that standard of excellence into these spaces and have that crossover? And like you said, there's a handful of big festivals that do this type of stuff. And when you look at things like Burning Man and some of these other things, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of human energy that comes together to simultaneously create and destroy. But what if we remove the destroy from that equation? And what if it's just coming together to create? And that creating is cyclical and layered and a continuation on the previous year. And like you're saying, this like pop-up village kind of model. And that's something that I think we've spoken about in the past. And it's a conversation that I have a lot with a lot of different people is like, what does that start to look like? And then you bring in the filming layers and, the TV series and then now
Mhm.
all of a sudden there's incentives and grant money and all sorts of different ways that you can start to structure things. But yeah, so like, I'm exploring all of these avenues as well. And I do think it's a smart approach ultimately. And so, there's definitely a lot of overlap in that.
Yeah. I need you to succeed with all of it, the bioregional manufacturing. I feel like you are creating the I don't know, sort of deeper level of operating system of which Motherland will be an application of, or hopefully a flagship of, a star example of what it looks like when all of these things are put together tastefully with, and in like a really impactful way. And so um, yeah, I like that's why I'm like I need Dylan and I need everything you're doing. I need it. I need it to happen. And I'm like I will do everything and anything I possibly can to like be yeah, you get where I'm getting at, but it's like it needs maybe there needs to be like a shining application. Like every operating system needs like the killer app, And so like so hopefully Mothership is kind of like, yes, it's many things to many people. Yes, it's a collective of people. And it's like I'm gonna now really like build out this agency aspect of it. It's a media apparatus. It's a um, we're building our own sort of technologies in house as well now that like you can vibe code so much easily, so much quicker. And then also, and then Motherland is kind of like the world build. But Mothership is also, I'm realizing, is like maybe again coming back around to like Mothership as in a sense a lifestyle brand as well. Because I feel like someone needs to like embody that
Uh-huh.
in a way that's like that's yeah, I feel like Motherland in a way is saying like, hey, here's how we should be doing life, here's how we can live, and we can do it, so we should. Oh, and so like let's create it, and in doing that like it'll just and it's not to say we don't love South Central or we don't love New York City or Chicago or Tokyo, but it's like because we love these places so much, like it's a way we have to prototype these new, I don't know, it's sort of blank slate worlds, and that will then re-inspire back but the homes and the places we grew up.
Well, on that, like to that note, it's like, yeah, I mean, when I hear that, it's about coming home, right? And it's about coming home to being, right? To being a human, to being a human being and stop being a human doing. And through that, it's like the emergence of like, I feel like there's such a huge issue in modern culture around, anxiety and depression and all these types of things. And I think a lot of that is because we're lost. We're out in the world. We're not home. And coming home is in finding purpose, in finding meaning. And if you can create a space for that purpose and that meaning to shine through, that creates a tangible, ongoing evolution of meaning, not only in the sense of just maybe coming together for a music festival, but in a deeper sense of like coming together to build something real that has some longevity to it, community itself, and what does that start to look like? And that has the potential to bring a lot of people home to that purpose and meaning where they've, become so detached from in the modern world. And so I do think it's a beautiful sentiment in that regard.
Yeah, Motherland. Yeah, there's I just as you're saying that I saw multiple layers of like just poetry where um I like very recently, like in the past week. So after I went home, after I took this trip to New York City, and then I came home back to here, is when I decided that okay, I'm declaring Motherland. I'm putting the stake in the ground, and Motherland is about like you said. I agree. It's like it's going home. It's going to the roots, and it's funny because like in some respect, David Sebastian's energy and who he is like has energized this process in some way. Like he's been in the chemistry set around what's been happening in cooking and alchemically within me and around all of this like recently. And it's funny because like he basically let go of his penthouse and like gave away all of his stuff and sold it all, whatever, it all away. And now he's gone back home to live with his mother. And he's like in his mom's places he's in his mom's place in the bathroom and set up like his little music studio in the bathroom of his mother's land, mother's home, and so yeah, all these things are there and happening all at the same time. And in a way I think what we're experiencing, David's experiencing, I'm experiencing in some personal way, in a very personal way, I think is something that we're seeking to share with more people because we're living in a very like soul crushing, soul sucking, soul killing time We don't have to go into all of the symptoms of sickness that are out there right now, but in a way, I think that's what I see Motherland too, is like an experience that's created there that allows people to come into a deeper sense of who they are and part of that is like rediscovering and re-experiencing their own heritage, ancestry, indigeneity, I think is a big part of that. Like waking people up to like I just imagine a bunch of like Korean Americans going to Motherland, the festival, and having an experience that's so true that awakens some 5,000-year-old ancestral memory of like who they are before they were displaced as essentially refugees of the Korean War. Who came over here escaping poverty and remembering who they are at a time where like South Korea is like facing population collapse.
Shoot, sorry, I just realized what time it is, and I think I'm half hour late for a call. Oh wait, I had to
Okay.
move it back an hour. Let me check here.
Take it down.
Just saw the clock, and I'm like, oh no.
Shit. You gotta run?
I don't know. I just texted. She said move it back, move it up an hour or back an hour. I don't understand exactly what she means.
Okay, well, we'll give her a second to respond. And yeah, if you got a job, we can wrap it up, no problem. And we can always part two. We've been on for about an hour and a half at this point.
Okay, I got another 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that gives us a really good amount of time to kind of bring it home. So, yeah, anyway, just to close that thought, I was just kind of riffing on like the type of experiences that, transformative experience that I would want for Motherland to be. I think also, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for Mothership as a brand to show a way of living, curating a lifestyle and showing what that looks like. And it might look like, what fashion and brands how they do things, generating certain lookbooks or certain drops in collaborations with certain brands. And so like I think I'm kind of like orienting into that space because I also want to like meet culture where it's at to a degree and so that we can kind of like bring people along a journey and in a way like influence hopefully or in some way like um, kind of established brands who have cultural cachet and followings, but just like poke them a little bit, like or like invite them into like 1 degree deeper or 1 degree further, and then eventually in a 6 months or 9 months they're on a call with you, and we're all planning this eco village, and it's like, and then they get another level of the revelation and the aha moment and the eureka that I've had, and just build the movement that way. And I think that's part of me being in my zone of genius is I think one of the things I am good at is like galvanizing people around a vision and getting them excited about it and building community. And so, so that's kind of where I'm setting my orientation. I would love to coordinate with you as much as possible in along the way, at each stage, just coordinate and collaborate in whatever way is necessary or valuable or value add, like at that stage. Like one person that's come to mind right now is just in the realm of funding is Mika. I don't know. I don't know if you've really like properly met Mika Onishi.
I
She's
don't think so.
someone that, yeah, she's someone that I want to connect you with and bring together. Um, yeah, a meeting of the minds because, yeah, I could say a lot about her, but she is somebody she's Japanese, USC graduate, had a very successful career in fashion and beauty world, kind of came to the spiritual awakening moments in her journey and opened up another dimension of her being as a shamanic healer and had her awakening and gifts come online. And so, practicing that and she's looking to channel that towards what she calls House of Remembering, which is essentially a healing temple that she wants to do her history through. I think one of the companies she built in, I think the beauty space, yeah, she sold, got her exit, and then as fate would have it, she was brought into becoming a VC partner at a fund which is now goes by Portal, and their whole like kind of thesis is around positive technology or shaping or guiding this exponential technology, AI and otherwise, in a direction that honors sovereignty, human sovereignty. And so that's something that she's a champion of. But lately she's been doing some really substantial work in the X Prize community, and is this, yeah, fascinating dot connector in that world, and also like has desires around like storytelling and film. Anyway, a lot I could say, but she's definitely deeply plugged into the world of capital, and speaks that language very well. But yeah, has is just very multi and same kindred spirit. And so I think she'll be blown away when she sees the Empire Village. Is that what it's called?
Well, yeah, it's the Village of Empire, and yeah,
Village of Empire.
the product doesn't really have a name yet. I'm running it through what I'm currently calling Blue Horizon Properties, which is a reference to the Blue Horizon of Lake Michigan.
Mm.
Um,
Contextual to the local
mhm.
environment.
So that will be kind of the real estate investment trust layer, I think, to that, and specifically other properties that we get in throughout Michigan. And like I said, I think ultimately that'll all scale into the Axia fund at some point.
Mm.
Um, and it would be my goal, to see if we can get the Axia fund up and running in any sort of real way, which I'm talking to a lot of really amazing people around that over the next few weeks. Projects like Mothership and Motherland, like those would fit right into the category of what we try to invest in. And so, yeah, I
Mm.
mean, I definitely think there's overlap in all of these arenas, and see again, how the systems that we're building, like I want to make it all open source. And so it's like whatever we can do to share information and start to build
Yeah.
that ability to share things with each other, and not only with each other but with the rest of the world at large. What does that start to look like? I don't have an idea yet, but I have glimpses of what's possible.
Mm.
And I think it can all, a lot is coalescing right now, and I think that there's a lot of amazing opportunities. It's just about having the strong enough driving narrative to be the sort of, but like the gravity to maintain a through line of a specific vision, of this kind of big picture vision. And
Mm.
in being able to create that, and to me that looks like a handful of things, but it ultimately looks like being able to do a lot of this stuff better than pretty much anyone has up to now, and in doing so setting the example, and in setting the example creating the magnetism that's necessary to bring in
Mm.
the partners to be able
Mm.
to scale this properly. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
there are a handful of systemic investment things, philanthropic, whatever, refi and all these types of things. It's like, but what does it look
Yeah.
like to create the thing that sort of binds them all? And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping that Axia can serve as that catalyst. And it's like I've been really intentional about everything. Like it's named Axia, it's Greek for value. Like this is intentional about like the layers of like this is the new value system like that we can set as a society at large. And if we can get behind it, collectively, all
Yeah.
these other things can stem from it. All the things that I just talked about and all the things that you just talked about. It's like there's just so much potential there. And it doesn't ever have to be one or the other. It's always both and how can we scale into that mentality?
Yeah, there's a conversation in here that I want to have. I've been thinking a lot about propaganda. And just, the recognition that you said the word narrative, and it's like we live inside of stories, and there's, reality is shaped by the prevailing narrative, and that's shaped by, the whoever powers that be, and the algorithms and whatnot. But like to, yeah, direct attention towards, to direct attention, which directs energy and resources. Yeah, you need a compelling narrative. And I think I've been thinking about I've been thinking about that a lot, and I feel like that's almost an area where I would like love to just focus like all of my attention and focus is to just creating the most compelling propaganda, or media content or storytelling, counter narrative, I would say, which I think would be is like this art form of like I think in a way like it's the formula that I see is sort of like real time hand to hand combat of like the media landscape is to whatever the narrative and storyline of the day is that's garnering the most attention, to speak to that but split off. It's like, okay, here's the storyline, here's the headline of the day, and then in a way like quote tweet that okay, this is what you're talking about. Well, here's what I have to say about that from the Axia perspective or the mothership perspective or the motherland perspective, and do it in a way that's maybe mimetic, and or like has high mimetic value. And so like I think there's just like a almost like a meme army, so to speak, that like or a meme squadron that's just like focused on like, okay, what's the hot viral like what does everyone's algorithm, what does everyone's feed look like today? Because we're all probably seeing like 4 or 5 of the same shit every day on our feed, and so like jump into that because that's where all the comments are going. That's where all the likes and all the eyeballs are at. Jump into that stream. Don't try to be over here trying to start and drum up your own narrative and get people to care where there's no attention flowing. Like jump into the stream and split, just every day be out there redirecting some of that attention stream towards here. And I think that's like a dedicated like unit, and a dedicated effort. And I wonder if like that's something I really love, yeah, for Mothership to kind of Mothership Media or the Mothership News Network, things that I've just kind of like jokingly created stuff about, but would love to dedicate some real people towards that. So anyway, I'm just kind of riffing at this point, but
Yeah, so I'll introduce you to
yeah.
Zach. Zach, he's right now working on a film series called Another World is Possible. He
Mm.
spent the last 5 years traveling around the world, going to all of the crypto conferences, regenerative things, visiting eco villages, hanging out with the Kogi and the Mamas, hanging out with the
Mm.
indigenous elders in Africa, and, all over the place. He has many terabytes of amazing footage and interviews of the brightest minds in the world right now, and he's been traveling around, for 5 years doing this. And me and him have been talking a lot the last few weeks in regards to, setting up the storytelling agency. He right now he's referring it to as sort of the meta myth engine essentially, and what does it look like to purposefully target a lot of these regenerative businesses and be able to come in and help them streamline their story, specifically their narrative. And what does it
Mm.
look like to tell this story in a way to, transcend the game A to game B and really do it in a really profound way? In doing so, taking, all the employees, all the different people at those companies through this sort of self-realization process, through the act of storytelling and embodying that story.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I'll have to have
Cool.
him come by. He's in Topanga, so I can have him come by at some point and you guys can hang out. And
I'd
I
love
might
that.
be in LA in May at some point. I'm not sure yet, but there's a possibility that that will happen. I might be around for a couple weeks.
Okay, well let me know. I'm happy to help, you know, in whatever way I can to create a valuable LA trip for you too, just around, common cause. Feel like there's like a Soho House link up with Mika that we need to have, and just politic on all this. Yeah, I'd love to meet Zach. And yeah, I love what you guys are thinking about with that work, but also like I think with the mothership cultural agency, it's a lot about like impacting pop culture as well. So yeah, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that as well, but I don't know, that's something that I feel like a lot of people in the regenerative worlds and in these kind of fringe worlds that are like super visionary and like of have a beautiful consciousness. Like not all of them speak can come back and speak to pop culture or impact pop culture or like connect those dots. And that's somewhere I feel like I'm one of few people perhaps that's like connected to that in a way where I feel like I can hit it in the middle and like put out something impactful that like begins to break down some of these silos. And just like imagine how much easier all of our work would be if like all of a sudden it was really cool to like be regenerative. Like broadly pop culture wise, like it create moments like that and slowly begin to like, establish these beachhead through culture impactful, iconic cultural moments that like just shift, you know what I'm talking about. Like you're a culture magician as well. So like um
Yeah. And
so
I think
yeah.
it's happening. It's just about, like you're saying, like those flags in the sand, like the catalyst moments that allow it to become real. It's happening either
Mhm.
way. Like it just
For
is.
sure.
It just has to. Right.
Absolutely.
And people know that and they realize it. And this is why you're getting like, long journey VC fund partnering up with Edge City Esmeralda stuff.
Mm.
And so these big funds are starting to come in and see these things and recognizing, we need to invest in some of this stuff. And, for good or bad, I don't, there's a lot of arguments within the community right now if this is a positive or negative thing. Um,
You'll have to tap me into that.
but yeah, so I mean, all that to say though is like it's moving, the needle is moving on the regenerative
Yeah.
movement. But like you said, like there's a definite lack of awareness around how to communicate to the younger generations, how to communicate in a way that is culturally meaningful.
Hmm.
And that is something that I too, yeah, am very passionate about. And what does that look like? And that's something I'm starting to hope to try to do with Biome. Like when you go onto the Instagram and stuff, like we're trying to make it sexy. We're trying to do a good job with all the design, with all the storytelling, and start to appeal and start to be a crossover. And it is still niche, we're not trying to go like super mainstream or super cultural
Yeah.
with it, but
Yeah.
we want to hit a certain level of excellence that then can appeal to people looking back at it, right? They'll see it, 5 years from now when regenerative is really popular. We'll look back and see, oh wow, those guys are creating timeless content that existed up to now.
Mm.
And so, and all the other layers of everything that I'm building and that you're building, like it's like, yeah, it has to have that sort of relevance and speak to a deeper cultural truth. And yeah, but yeah, I have to
Well,
hop
well,
off here in a
yeah.
second.
Okay. Well, brother, thank you for your time and for the drop in, for the reconnect. And yeah, let's get down to business. Make all this
Cool.
happen.
Cool. Well, sounds
All right,
good.
man. Yeah, to be
Awesome.
continued. Yeah, I'll follow up with you.
All right, cool. We'll talk
All
soon.
right, brother. All right, ciao.
See ya.